No straggling now. Jaeger looked back at his daughter Raven as he stood amidst the brush on top of the ridge. She was having a bit of trouble navigating the scrap heap, but he knew that was because she tried to be careful not to step on any of the wildflowers that grew in it. "I'm right behind you," she insisted as she hopped from the top of an old Stag chassis to the wing of a CT-230 and slid down it to reach the part of the ridge he was standing on. "See, I made it." Jaeger smirked and then looked back out from the ridge up along the coast. From here they had a decent vantage up along the old coast highway, past Old Man Merlin's Tanner Tower, Mirror Beach, and even across the Bay of Bones to Hive Island. The water was lazily lapping at the coast while he watched. The old wrecks scattered in the bay, which gave it the name, groaning gently as the water pushed them around. But he was focused on something closer to the edge of Mirror Beach as he pointed. "See it?" "Yeah. We're lucky, any closer and it would have come down right in the middle of the sun trees," she mentioned. He was referring to an impact crater that dug a track through the dry sand and dirt right up to the edge of the sun trees. "Think anyone else noticed? It's hard to miss a falling star. Makes a rather big entrance," Jaeger mentioned as he began to walk down the ridge towards the crater. "We'll need to inspect the sun trees while we're here, just in case any were damaged by the fall." "Wouldn't Merlin have mentioned it?" Raven asked as she followed along behind him. "Merlin's not going anywhere near that. Part of our deal with keeping his sun trees working, and furthermore he thinks they're all bombs that will explode the moment someone gets near," Jaeger explained. "Has that ever happened?" He could hear the mix of curiosity and worry in her voice, which made him let out a wry chuckle. "Only once that I know of. But that's all it takes to leave a lasting impression upon someone." He kept his hands in their usual position as he walked, with his rifle before him, letting the sling take up most of the weight but ready to snap his weapon up in an instant if he saw a threat. It was a practice gait that was so familiar to him he was positive it would feel strange to walk any long distance without his weapon. He idly wondered just how many kilometers he'd walked like this over the years. "Think we'll have time to walk out on Mirror Beach for a bit? It's the right tide for it?" his daughter asked as they headed down the ridge. "Another time. We need to check the sun trees and scavenge the star before anyone else shows up to take a look." He didn't even need to look to know she had her usual pouty expression on whenever he didn't let her head out to Mirror Beach. It was a section of coast that had once been part of the sea until the war. Between the new wrecks and generous use of Quakers during the fighting, it had shifted apart and become dry and disproportionately salty for reasons he didn't understand. Something to do with the materials of the wrecks. What he did know was at certain times the tide rose up just enough to coat it with a very thin layer of water to make it almost a perfect mirror. When you walked across it, then it was like walking across the sky itself. He liked to point it out to his daughter as a sign that even a war can bring about beauty at times. Just like her. Of course, then she'd ask him to stop embarrassing her with his sentimental dad stuff. Which was part of why he did it, of course. What about just a quick look for any lost fish? Once more Jaeger let out a wry chuckle as his daughter tried another tactic to get him to relent to her wishes. "If the sun trees don't need any repairs, we could take a quick look." This time he did glance over his shoulder for a moment to see her do her little victory dance before scurrying down the ridge to catch up as he smiled inside his helmet while watching her. Soon enough they had reached the base of the ridge where it flattened out along the dry plains of the coast. Aside from the small green bushes that dotted the plains, it was a pretty barren area. Barren of plants, at least. There were a few old car skeletons along the road that had long since been scavenged. Not to mention the concrete bot traps scattered across the plains nearer to the beach from back in the war. Someone years ago had come by and painted happy cartoonish faces on the spiny starfish, as Raven called them. But the paint was now cracked and faded, which honestly made them look far creepier to him than they used to. Maybe the mysterious painter would show up again to touch up their work. It was unlikely, though, this far out from anything. Really, the old road was only used by pilgrims and a few hauler vans headed south from Circuit Mountain. Sometimes they'd stop by Merlin's for a charge, or possibly just to stay the night in one of his tanners, as he called them. They were about half a day from the nearest settlement in the basin on the other side of the bay thanks to how slow travel through the old city was. Between the broken skyscrapers and the scavs it wasn't exactly easy trails. Of course that all just made him more curious about who painted the faces in the first place. Why do you think Merlin always flies the old flag? You and him are the only ones I ever see with it, and he's the only one who flies it out in the open. Jaeger blinked as Raven's voice brought him out of his quiet contemplation. He looked out over Merlin's Tanner Tower to see the old shards and bars fluttering in the breeze from the top of the tower. He couldn't help but snort a little as he always did when he saw the old flag that Merlin had. Not because he disapproved of it but more because he remembered when the old man actually raided an old car dealership to try and find a flag he thought was big enough to be worthy of flying from the top of his tower. It means different things to different people. It's from a time of peace, prosperity, and power. A time when humanity wasn't just scattered between the stars but could stride between them. He trailed off as he realized he was basically rewording an old recruitment drive. Think I'll ever get to another planet someday? Jaeger glanced back at his daughter for a moment and saw her looking up into the sky, so he looked up as well to see the twins high in the sky up above the rings that stretched up towards them from the south. Really appeared to stretch towards them. It wasn't like the rings really reached out to the twins on purpose. Celestial bodies didn't exactly have a mind of their own. Far as he knew. You weren't satisfied with the trips we took on Ham's old lifter to Soraya? He nodded to the more blue of the twins up in the sky. That's just a moon. It's not another planet. She replied, which made him laugh. Oh, too good for just a moon, are you? He teased. Kids these days. He scoffed for a moment. When I was a kid I dreamed of just getting into space one day, let alone another planet. I didn't get off Earth until I was an adult, and here you are already spoiled for space travel. Sheesh. Making me feel like a grumpy old man here. I'm about to start yelling at kids to get off our lawn. They both laughed a little at that before she spoke up and actually made him feel rather old. What's a lawn? I've heard you mention it before. Jaeger sighed as she asked that and reminded him that he really needed to find a better way to get her an education. He had no idea what he was forgetting to teach her, and he wasn't much of a teacher to begin with. Used to be people had little plots of land around their houses with just grass on them. For lawns, I suppose. I mean to say lawns specifically, as far as I could remember, was the grass in between the front of a house and the street. If you owned it. Otherwise it was, I don't know. Just your yard, I think. He shrugged as he walked. What was it for? He wasn't sure if she was really curious or he was just bad at explaining old things like lawns. Just to show off that you had enough land to devote to just grass, I guess? He suggested, rather unsure what the point was now that he thought about it. I never understood the concept. Though I always did love gardens. Used to be for more than just food like ours. People used to grow flowers, pretty things that smelled nice or looked nice, or both. I'd like to get some eventually for our garden, though I realize that goes against my very own lessons about only taking what's useful. I wouldn't want to be a hypocrite. You could try it sometime. I hear it's quite common. Jaeger laughed as Raven said that and wondered if that was some hidden cynical nature to her or just a joke she picked up from one of his memories. It certainly sounded like something her mother would say. I could. But I'd prefer to live as I preach. Besides, I wouldn't even know where to get flowers in the first place. He shrugged it off. What about the ones we just passed in the scrap field? She suggested. Those are wildflowers, which is really just a nice way of saying pretty weeds. If I brought them to the garden, they'd likely overtake everything else. Or die. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure why they only grow in the scraps. Maybe the old materials there seeped something into the ground. Either way, it's unwise to mess up our garden in the name of flowers. He pointed out. Did you have one as a kid? Back on Earth? A garden, I mean. She asked next, which made him laugh and shake his head a moment. Me? No. No. I grew up in the stacks. People pressed in so tight you couldn't swing your arms for fear of hitting a neighbor. He trailed off once more, not feeling like going into further details until his daughter spoke again. You don't like showing off memories from back then, do you? She was getting to the point where he was worried she was getting in on the secret. That while he was her dad, that didn't actually mean he was a giant all-knowing, all-powerful figure who would always be there like some sort of benevolent god. That in fact he was just a person with flaws, tragedies, and mistakes just like anyone else. No, he finally answered as they slowly strode across the plains towards the Sun Tree Farm and the fallen star. They aren't happy memories. A lot of struggle. Extremely claustrophobic compared to all of this. He waved a hand at the open expanse before them. I didn't see a sunrise or sunset until I was in my teens and climbed to the top of one of the stacks. The best I got was at night. I could look up and see the moon among the ships and stations. Too many lights to see the stars at night. Not good memories. He shook his head slowly. Is that why you joined up? So you could leave? She asked and he nodded. Part of my reasons anyway. Also to try and find my dad. My mom told me he was a soldier. Gave me the name Jaeger before heading off on campaign. Means hunter in some old human language. Figured I could be a hero like my mom told me my dad was. He had phrased it that way so he didn't lie to her, yet also didn't reveal that what his mother had told him wasn't actually the truth. It had been all too late that he found out all the things his mom's little lies had protected him from back then. Part of the struggle with being a parent. Wanting to be honest yet wanting to protect them. So they let you into the elite Valhalla program right away? And those what were they called? The HK teams? He wasn't sure just how much she knew about him and her mother from back then, but he had to imagine that she'd learn what HK stood for soon enough if she didn't know already. Would that change her perspective of him? Taint some of the memories she'd seen? Much to everyone's surprise. Typically that program was reserved for really phenomenal people. Mostly people like your mom. Not some dirty ignorant kid from the stacks like me. Yet, through all my aptitude testing though, they said I displayed a profound adaptability and compatibility with the program that made me an ideal human candidate. It was only through that program that I could be stripped of my weaknesses and be made again in the image of a god to better serve all humankind. He could still remember the sense of pride he felt when General Odinson told him that. The egotistical old bastard. I displayed a hidden talent almost squandered by peacetime, he muttered as he remembered more conversations with his old CO. All the signs he had missed. Likely because he wasn't even looking for them at the time. Then you met Mom, right? He glanced back at Raven for a moment and nodded, glad that she had pulled him out of his darker memories. I'm sure you know that story well by now. You like that memory? He mentioned before looking back out at the sun trees that got closer with every step. It's warm and fuzzy like your hugs. Jaeger couldn't help but grin like an idiot inside his helmet when she said that. So you and Mom shared that hidden talent? No. Jaeger shook his head. For me it was a hidden talent. For your mom it was there from the very beginning. She had always been destined for the program. It was expected of her and trained into her from the start, so it wasn't hidden. No, your mom's hidden talent was cooking. Cooking? He could hear the surprise in her voice, which made him laugh. Yeah, cooking. Just a natural talent for it, I think. You wouldn't believe how surprised I was the first time we were out in the field and she actually cooked something for us instead of relying on the meal packs. It was on a monsoon-class world. Just rain and storms the whole time we were there. Staying dry was impossible even in our suits. He shrugged in his armor a moment to emphasize his point. We stopped at an old survey outpost one night. Any sort of shelter was welcome. Then we were all shocked when your mom gets to work in the kitchen and makes this rice and fish dish that was just amazing. The smells, the flavors, even how it looked. It was like something from a movie or a cooking vid. Just incredible. I don't even know where she got the ingredients. Not a word before then to any of us about wanting to cook or that she even knew how. She always did love to surprise. He trailed off before he got too deep in the memory. He needed to keep scanning the horizon for signs of scav or other threats. Did she tell you where she learned? Yeager chuckled when his daughter asked that. Oh no. Not your mother. I complimented her cooking and was obviously surprised she was so good, and do you know what she said? He asked and was about to say it when his daughter chirped up first. Don't you understand by now that I'm a far superior person than you could ever be, and that all my great and varied skills represent a vast gulf in our beings such as Prometheus to the caveman? Yeager laughed harder as she said that and slowly shook his head. Sound almost just like her. He smiled as he kept walking across the plains. The wind gently rustled the tops of the little bushes that dotted the land, and the ocean kept lapping lazily against the coast. It was a peaceful day so far, aside from the fallen star. A good day for memories. When she says that in memories I can feel the warmth, but I don't get it. It sounds sort of mean. Raven mentioned. Bit of an inside joke. From a seminar presentation early in the program. Basically, one of the officials didn't think very highly of me. Most of them didn't. Except your mom. Right from the very beginning she treated me like an equal, even though she certainly didn't have to. She really was better than me in every conceivable way. Just like you are. He mentioned. Daewad. He smiled as she groaned out at his compliment, knowing she hated it despite being the truth. Really, he loved the fact that he could look at his offspring and know they were just better than him. He wasn't sure if it was every parent dreamed of for their kids, but it was certainly what he had dreamed of. After a moment though, he continued. But she acted like we were the same. Her and the others we fought alongside. Part of what made it so appealing. Then to make fun of the officials, she'd say that to me at times. Because despite her and the others being better, I never fell behind. I never wavered. I never broke. He took a slow deep breath then as he worked to keep some of the darker memories at bay. How come I never see any of the memories like that? You with the others. Not just the battles. Raven asked, and he sighed. I could try to tailor a few. But they're buried so deep in my memories of the war itself and all the terrible things those nice moments are surrounded by. You know how it is at times with the context of memories. They bleed through. And the war was just terrible. You shouldn't be subjected to that. Even as he said that, he wasn't really sure if he was trying to protect her or himself. But I've seen some of your fights. And you let Max see some of those memories, but he won't talk to me about them. Yeager had a feeling she'd bring that up. First of all, a fight isn't the same as a battle. And a war is far worse than a single battle or even a collection. The best soldiers might die to things that have nothing to do with their skills. A wayward artillery shell, a crashing fighter, or a stray bullet are just some of the things that don't care how good you are. There's also the psychological factors involved. The stress. The constant weariness. It's hard to express. And it's wrapped up in my own view of it at the time, which was, he trailed off as he tried to think of how to explain it. If you were afraid, I don't mind, Dad. You've told me that fear is natural. That it's nothing to be ashamed of, but instead worked through. And I'm sure a war was really scary. A sad smile crept across his face as she said that. He wished it was that simple. Unfortunately, that's not it. Back then I liked it. I craved it. I was doing the only thing I was good at with the only people who cared for me like a family. Or, that's what it felt like that. I didn't think of our targets as people, Xeno, or human. They were just targets. I had a greater fear of failing my comrades or my commander than anything else. I didn't even consider why the orders were being given or who they were being given by until it was too late. He shook his head and sighed at the memories. Your brother has a lot of your mother in him. A lot. I have him watch those memories not to learn how to fight, or to experience battle, since I hope he never has to suffer through such a thing. But I have him watch those memories to understand the danger of such thinking. To see where, how, and why I failed back then. Before your mother and I realized the truth. It took me far too long to see. And I want to make sure he never falls into the same trap. There's nothing wrong with failure provided you learn from it. And help those around you avoid the same failings you made. Yeager didn't really like revealing such things to Raven, but the alternative of protective isolation was worse. Oh, Raven muttered and grew quiet then as she no doubt thought over what he'd just said. He wondered how much more he was chipping away at his status in her mind by revealing his flaws like this. That she might one day understand her father was a terrible person. They were just getting to the edge of the rows of sun trees then. Tall arrays of solar panel arrays built with their arms stretched up to the sky like the branches and leaves on a tree. They would slowly turn during the day to track the path of the sun in the sky. Check the west terminal. He nodded to the hub closer to the coast. Sure. She agreed and scampered off towards it. Yeager approached the central terminal then and tapped his code into the pad to get the screen active. Looked like they were lucky. The impact hadn't damaged the lines and far as he could tell the minor reduction in efficiency was normal for the panels just getting dirty. He'd have to come back out with Raven in a week or so to clean them off. All good, Dad. She called out from the other terminal and gave him a thumbs up. He waved her over then as they walked from the center of the sun trees out to the impact site itself. The dirt and sand had been dug up by the fallen star and they walked along the edge to see just what kind of fallen star it would be today. Careful. See the Ravex markings? He pointed to a few places in the debris that were marked with the Star of Claws. Yes, but it should be one of the late war recon models. See, it's also got packed markings. She pointed to a few area in the debris. So probably one of their retrofit packages. Which should mean no anti-tamper devices. Already so much smarter than him. He smiled as they got near the end of the crater. Inside was the remains of a Ravex Null G recon bot. Designed specifically for use in space to hide among traffic and catch ship movements as well as defense locations. They didn't have the power for true interplanetary flight and relied on covert carriers. It had likely been stuck in the planet's gravity well since the war and fought the decaying orbit as long as it could. I think both the sensor suite and the core look intact from here. It might have been aiming for the ocean? Raven suggested as she looked west to the waves nearby. If its core was working then it was trying to aim for the beach. They're programmed for self-preservation of data. The sand would have been a softer landing than most areas around here. If you can salvage the sensors we could get our sky tracker running again. If my old packed codes still work there's a chance we can even save the core memories as well. Though I'm sure it was awfully lonely up there all alone. Yeager looked up into the sky for a moment. The Ravex didn't give their bots much personality if any. But he hadn't found one so old. Never knew what could happen when a bot wasn't wiped after so long. Well, we can finally give it some company. Raven mentioned. But it needs to cool down a bit more, I think. So, why don't we go to Mirror Beach to wait a little? He chuckled as she worked back around to what she really wanted to do. She was right though the remains still looked hot. Entering atmosphere had that effect. 5 minutes. He agreed and she pumped an arm in the air before racing off ahead of him towards the edge of the beach to their south. He followed along at his own pace, never one to rush. When he walked up to the edge of the dunes that dropped down into the Mirror Beach he could see the sky stretch out before him as the area lived up to its name. Raven was happily running across the shallow water, making ripples in the sky. Her form mirrored beneath her in the flat water. The rings, moons, clouds in the sky, they were all doubled as they seemed to stretch out far into the horizon. Raven! Back! He called out and dropped down into the dune. He hadn't seen them until he focused on the horizon and his mask zoomed in on the objects in the bay. They were moving among the bones of the old wrecks, picking their way through carefully. Raven didn't question his orders and quickly came running back to the edge as he nestled into the sand of the dune, rifle out. After a moment his armor would start to shift colors to blend in better with the sand directly around him. Raven clambered up the dune and rolled over the edge beside him, After a few moments she crawled back up to peer with him into the distance. "What am I looking for?" she whispered. "Hive, a collective regime of peace and love." He spat out the slogan like the venom it was. Lumberers. 207 to 210. Widespread among the wrecks. 10 kilometers. His crosshairs came up over the creatures in the far distance. The lumberers themselves were extremely tall yet gentle creatures with 6 legs that had evolved to walk between the channels and islands. Jaeger thought they looked something like massive furry anteaters but with legs a dozen meters long at the very least. Thing is, while they were herbivores and not dangerous, he wasn't worried about them. He was worried about what clung to their backs. "Drones," she said as she saw them. "And soldiers," he added. "Lead 2 lumberers. Notice the different visor colors and larger size." The creatures were being ridden by drones and soldiers of the hive. Mostly humans on this planet with bulky visor rigs strapped to their heads and connected by cables woven into the flesh of the lumberers as giant moving hubs. Drones and soldiers had to be connected to hubs in order to survive for very long. Without the rest of the collective they seemed to revert to a comatose state rather quickly. Are they headed this way? While she could see them herself, he figured she wanted his opinion since he was more experienced. And her father. Jaeger hummed for a second as he watched them. "No," he finally answered after a little. "Wrong angle of walk through the bay. It looks more like a work scavenge party. The soldiers indicate they're heading in or near Old City and the drones will need the extra protection. But it does mean they're confident enough to come down off their island in big groups. Maybe their preachers have found more converts to bolster their numbers. A single lifetime of labor in exchange for countless VR lives." He muttered derisively. "Isn't their memory-linked consciousness based on the tech used in the program you and Mom were in?" Raven asked. "All memory-sharing tech is based on the Mesmemiori who could naturally link in other sapients. But they just shared memories and experiences on the small scale. They had small family units. Like us. And unlike the hive who are connected all the time," he pointed out. "But between absolute dynamics and opulence entertainment she started. "It's complicated." He cut her off. "We'll talk more later. When it's safe." They were quiet then as he watched the lumberers in the distance. There were hundreds of drones and a few dozen soldiers clinging to their backs as they crossed the bay. "Will Basin need help, you think?" she asked, always looking for a reason to try and get close to the settlement and help them. She had too good a heart for her own good. "I doubt they'll bother Basin. They're likely focusing on Old City and the scavs. But if they get a foothold on this side of the bay it could be dangerous." As he watched them in his sights he tried to suppress very similar memories of hunting the hive during the war. But what if they do need help? Should we go back and get Max? Maybe see if Merlin could help too? Jaeger sighed softly as Raven insisted. "Raven, we're not welcome in Basin. If we showed up they'd be as likely to shoot at us as the hive." "More likely," he corrected. Bad as the hive were, few had forgiven him and the other revenant for their hand in things. "But after what you did? After Mom's sacrifice? Doesn't that mean anything?" "Surely Enough," he finally hissed before sighing and taking a moment to collect himself. "Raven. Doing good and evil, it's not a simple game of numbers. What I did. What your mother did. The work we did at the end of the war doesn't absolve us of what we did earlier. It's not as though I can add enough check marks to one column until it's more than the other and think the universe will forgive me. And unfortunately the rest of the people are all too happy to make you suffer for my sins. If they even knew you existed. I have little to give besides a legacy of fear and hate that I cannot spare you from." "Dad," Raven trailed off, and while she searched for what to say Jaeger watched the horizon. "Besides, they don't need me protecting them anymore." He pointed and Raven looked up. They could see them before they could hear them, but the roar of the fighters filled the air as they flew low over the bay. Immediately the lumberers began to turn back and retreat towards their island. The shards and bars may be dead, but that didn't mean society had totally collapsed along with it. The pact may be a shadow of its former self at the height of the war, but at least they still made an effort to protect their people. Think they're looking for the fallen star? Raven asked. They might. But they'll be busy with the hive for a while. Chasing them off. Come on, let's go salvage it while we can. He stood up, then dusting the sand off his armor for a moment as it began to shift colors to try and blend in with his new position as he walked. Dad. He paused and looked down at his daughter then. I know you sometimes think that's your legacy. But I know not everyone hates synthetics. And I'll change the minds of those that do. Someday. She reached for his hand then, and he took a moment, releasing his rifle and letting it hang from his sling. He carefully removed his glove then. He wanted to touch her with his real hand. Once he had joined the Valhalla program, he'd spent what felt like years in his armor, only touching the world through his gloves. A selective isolation that kept him from feeling the world around him. Figuratively and literally. Hell, when he was fully suited he might as well not be human inside his suit. No one could tell from the outside the way every single millimeter of flesh was protected and hidden. It had been a long time before he had touched anyone else. With his real fingers at least. So he closed his hand around that of his daughter. Like her mother's, it was an odd feeling. Tingly. He'd expected them to be cold the first time he touched her, but really it was warm. About as warm as an organic human. A side effect of their powerful cores. I know, sweetie. I'm positive you will. He brushed a few of the color quills from her face to look into her eyes. A mismatched pair, one green cybernetic that looked human and the other a pale blue from a Valiant-class sentry. He wanted to kiss the top of her head, but that wasn't possible with his helmet on, so he settled for pulling her in close for one of his famous big warm fuzzy hugs. Normally she complained if he held her too long, but this time she hugged him back as tight as she could. When he finally released her from the hug, his hand went to hers once more and they began to walk back towards the crashed recon bot hand in hand. Though his free hand fell to the sidearm on his hip. A habit he couldn't break even now. Though with the ever-present danger of scavs, it wasn't a habit he really wanted to break either. Once we get back, I'll see if I can isolate that memory I mentioned of your mom cooking the fish. Without all the other stuff. Thanks, Dad. Think I inherited any of her cooking skills? She asked. Oh, not a chance. I think you were trying to kill your brother and me with that cake you made. He teased. It's not my fault. The book glitched and had the wrong proportions. She huffed. All I know is it killed half a dozen tellrats and put poor Sasha into a near coma after she ate one of those little varmints. He continued to tease. She's a cat. She's always either in a coma or kill mode. She doesn't have any other settings. And it's only 'cause tellrats can't handle chocolate. She tugged on his hand a little as they walked with her, huffing about him, making fun of her cooking skills. I'm just saying, don't try to win over the hearts and minds of the people of Basin by making them cupcakes or anything. You might poison a lot of them. He grinned as he riled her up. Dad. She stomped beside him as he paused to laugh and ruffle up her quills. Joking. Joking. He replied and waited for her to smile before walking on towards the nearby wreckage once more. Think the bot will be happy to have company after all this time? I hope he's got some interesting memories. She said as they drew near to salvage it. I'd like to think everyone has memories interesting to themselves at least. He replied and gave her hand a tighter squeeze. The current running through her digits sending a tingle further up his arm. Then he let her go so she could scamper down into the crater to start removing the core, making sure to be careful so she could preserve the memories. To preserve who it was. If it was anything. For it's memories that make a person what they are. Not their material. Synthetic, organic, human, xeno, were all the focus of debate and conflict during the war. But Yeager hoped that people might one day be able to accept that what mattered more now was coming together from all paths to help each other survive. He knew there was no future in which they accepted him. But maybe they'd accept Raven because all she wanted to do was help. That her synthetic heart was full of more love than most organic ones. He'd like to think they would come to accept her in time. Because while her body might be synthetic, her memories were all her own, and what they said about her was beautiful. Got her out nice and safe. And the scents are sweet too. Yeager looked back at her, instead of watching the hive retreat while the fighters roared overhead. They hadn't shot at them but were making sure they left the bay quickly. Her? He asked. Feels like a her. Raven replied with a nod as she strapped the memory core to her pack. Yeager dropped to a knee then so she could reach up and strap the sensor suite to the back of his armor. Once it was fastened, he stood up and took her hand once more. They began to walk back home then. Merlin's flag fluttering proudly from the top of his Tainer tower. The faded yet happy faces on the bot traps. The old metal skeletons of the cars abandoned on the cracked and crumbling road. They were at a world of faded hope. People were rebuilding as they always did. In time he was confident the Pact or some other government would surpass the old power of the FES and that prosperity and peace would return to the land. That thanks to people like Raven hope might be faded, but not lost. That hope was more than just a memory. Want to say hello to Merlin before we head home? Yeah. He said he'd try to get some ribbon from one of the traders to make me a bow. She smiled up at him and he smiled back even though she couldn't see it. They walked on, father and daughter separated by material. But nothing else.